My name is Steve Westgarth, and this is The Engineering Leader. If you're listening to this, please hit the subscribe button. That simple act will help people you know in the industry to raise the bar and build better software products for our customers. As a personal favour, I would also be so grateful if you could take a moment to share a link to theengineeringleader.com on your LinkedIn or Twitter. This podcast is all about building a community of like-minded people who want to share best practice in the engineering space, and your help in sharing a link will help us to connect to more engineering leaders. Today on The Engineering Leader, I'm joined by Michelle Kearns. Michelle is head of IT for Boots Ireland, where she is responsible for the IT operation across the Boots Irish business. Prior to Boots, Michelle was CCIO for the Irish Health Service Executive, digital health advisor to the World Health Organization, and also the founder and chair of One Health Tech Ireland. Michelle, it's a pleasure to have you on The Engineering Leader today. Let me tell you a secret. You also write bad code. If you disagree, you may as well switch off. Before we begin, could I just confirm that you also write bad code?
I definitely write bad code, Steve. Absolutely. But worse than that, I do love that opening gambit. There's one thing about bad code that's part of it, but bad documentation is nearly worse.
Oh, I can agree with that as well. Bad documentation is horrendous. How's your documentation?
A lot better.
Michelle, I've been really looking forward to talking to you because, as you know, I've recently joined GSK Consumer Healthcare as Global Head of Engineering. And in your world and your professional experience has been deeply rooted in the healthcare space. What is it about healthcare tech that really gets you excited?
Oh, wow, that is a big question. Where would you even start with that? I suppose I think technology has so much to offer healthcare, and when it's done right, we can make a huge difference in patients' lives. And that sounds really, I don't know, cliched or too, powerful or something like that. But it's actually the truth. And when I was CIO in CareDoc, we ran a program called Smile. And what it did, it used wearable devices in technology in people's own home. And what we had in the background were telephone triage nurses supporting them. But the simplest of things, the simplest of interventions can really, really help people. And I think sometimes we can overcomplicate things in healthcare. And in health tech, the thing that kind of scares me sometimes is when you have companies who come in from a non-health background and go, we can change the world, we can do all this cool stuff. But realistically, they kind of sometimes miss the point that it is a patient, it's an individual, it's a person. There's only so much technology can do, and you need that wrap around of a person as well. But from a tech perspective, I think if we can get simple, basic things right, it can make a huge difference. There's some like amazing stories out there of people who have, simple things like blood pressure monitor, weighing scales, a Fitbit telling you when you're sleeping and when you're not sleeping. These have actually made huge differences to patients' lives, because what the nurse is doing in the background is tracking their information, what's happening. And they can see when there's a difference, when their blood pressure is elevated, when they've missed readings for a certain length of time, what's going on in their lives. And it actually allows you to delve into something that is the whole mental health side of things, where, you just need a human maybe to talk to you for a bit, or to go, okay, you missed some of your readings, what's going on here? And that's kind of just on a very simple side of things. But when you look at the bigger picture, what can health tech do? Health tech has the ability to change how healthcare is delivered, how we consume health, and how we really look after ourselves. But it's not necessarily the big, huge, life-changing, Elon Musk type thing. Sometimes it's just this basic, simple intervention that actually makes the huge difference.
And I think there's something there about scale, isn't there? Because you think about healthcare, you think about the size and breadth of even just the NHS in the UK, and I mean that's a massive organisation for quite a small country. You extrapolate that into other countries, maybe you're talking about the US or China or some countries in other parts of the world that really do have billions of people, and you can kind of see how companies kind of come in thinking that they have to change the world in order
Mm-hmm.
make an impact. So I think it's really interesting. You kind of draw back to what is the reason we're actually doing this as for a patient. What are we trying to achieve?
Yeah, and it's funny. I think one of the lessons I learned earlier on in my career, I had an awesome manager whose name is Fonzie McCarn, and for years was involved in the hospitality industry, and he owned hotels. And his comparison was, if a person came into a reception, they don't care if it's 10 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock at night. They expect a certain level of service. So why in hospitals and healthcare? Once it hits 6 o'clock, do we all of a sudden go, oh, well, no one's going to get sick after 6 o'clock. We'll just, ramp down our services, and definitely no one gets sick at weekends. So we won't do this and we won't do that. And the one thing that he always said to me is that if you can introduce all the tech in the world, but if it doesn't help a clinician to do something for a patient, they're not going to do it. So if you've all these bright ideas, but at the end of the day, it either hinders the clinician or the patient, well, what's the point in it? And I think that buy-in from people when you think you've got this brilliant idea, and it might be a brilliant idea, but you need to explore, how is it actually going to impact the person? How is it actually going to support the clinician? Is it going to support their journey, or what's it actually going to do for them? Because, sometimes it might be the coolest thing in the world, or it might be the coolest gadget in the world, but ultimately, is it actually going to make a difference to that person?
And one of the challenges that we often see, particularly in healthcare, when you talk about that new innovation or that new gadget, is the safety concerns that people have. So, maybe people have been doing things a certain way, or it's seen that in order to be safe, it needs to have some sort of human intervention or some sort of checking to make sure that it's okay to use. Do you see that as a particular challenge within the healthcare space? As we start to adopt some of these smaller interventions that maybe aren't, being rolled out on a global scale?
Do you know what, Steve? It's all about trust. And if you're a clinician who can't open their email because the machine you're working on is too old and it takes you 40 minutes because the network isn't good, if some IT person comes to you and says, here's a shiny new tool to use, is that trust going to be there? So it goes back, I think, to the fundamentals of, what are you actually trying? Just say if you're in a big hospital or something like that, if you come in with a new gadget, but then the person has to queue to use a computer because there's not enough computers around. If you're not solving the small things on the ground, then they going to have the trust in you to be able to deliver these things? So there's I don't know, there's this huge big gap, I think, between what is possible for people to do with technology, but then what's going to be trusted. And I think we've a long way to go, because we have amazing clinicians who will buy into the technology and get on with it. But then you'll have other people who will be very, very wary of it because their experiences with technology has been quite poor, and they might not necessarily trust what they're doing, or not what they're doing. They might not necessarily trust what the technology is doing, or if they can actually go, all right, well, I 100% do this. But I think the safety element is people are afraid to let computers make decisions, because where does the governance lie with that? Who does it lie with? And that is a huge question that needs to be answered. And that's why you have your HIPAA, why you have all your, I suppose, your, standards, your protocols, making sure that, if you look at the apps, there are so many apps out there. How do patients trust an app? How do the patients, know what they're going to use in the future?
So speaking as an engineer, I guess a lot of those safety concerns you're talking about are actually in the hands of people like me and the teams that I work with, to make sure that trust really is built up. So what can we as engineers do in order to help clinical professionals and people who are working in healthcare to trust the technology that we're building?
Build a relationship with the clinician and build the relationship with the people around you to understand what they're doing and understand their workflows and understand what they're actually trying to get out of it. I think the worst thing you can do is deliver a piece of tech and say, here you go, just use this. If they've had no input, or they haven't had an opportunity to say, okay, this part doesn't work, but this does for me, or the way I work, then you're really at, I suppose you're on the back foot, because what you've done is you've gone in and you've assumed that you know how they should work, rather than speaking to them and saying, how do you work, and how can we use technology to support you and to enable what you're doing, rather than take over and try and solve a problem that doesn't necessarily need to be solved by technology. But I think listening to, like, when you're trying to implement something, be it a piece of software or, a piece of tech, you've got to really understand, what problem are you actually trying to solve? And are you doing it because you think it's cool and, you think it's going to work? Or is there an actual, clinical need that you're trying to resolve?
See, it's really interesting you say that, because I spend a lot of time advocating that we need to get engineers closer to the end user. And I think historically, when engineering teams have kind of been put together, they've had requirements documents to kind of work off, or maybe business analysts have kind of looked at the business problem and have kind of worked out what needs to be done in order to solve it, and then that's been handed wholesale to a group of engineers to go and implement, with no opportunity to challenge the reason why we're doing it.
Danger, 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 danger.
Exactly that. And I mean, there have been some really interesting use cases, where obviously as we build agile development teams, and we connect engineers directly to product owners who are really close to the end user and to the technology, and really learn from those customer insights at how much more effective that is. And in my view, I mean, so at the moment we are actually working on an app at GSK, which will be launched into the Italian market. And I was actually talking with our engineers about, do we actually need to go to Italy to understand more about, what that market is all about, and to actually embed ourselves within it. I guess in an ideal world, having people who actually understand the Italian market, the people we're going to be working with, ideally even Italian engineers, to actually build the product, because they're best placed to actually respond to the customer need.
Absolutely. And that's something actually we, with the Council of Clinical Information Officers, and there is one very active in the UK as well, and they're on the Digital Health Network. And what they are trying to do, and what we try to do with Ireland, with the council as well, is that you want to have chief clinical information officers working hand in hand with your CIOs. You want them there to say, okay, what are you building? Right, here is our clinical input. Here are the team to work with. And that is what they're trying to do across the NHS and across the HSE, so that you have the clinicians and the technologists working together, because it's not going to work otherwise. Because, as you said, you'll get I suppose, how we interpret things as engineers or as software developers, and how a clinician actually works with a patient. We might think something is more straightforward. So I think the big thing there is, yes, be agile, be iterative, and don't be afraid to go back and say, okay, sorry, that didn't work. I think the worst thing you can do is persevere and go, no, it'll be fine at the end, it'll be fine. No. Just hands up, right? This is not working. So I think you need those stakeholders all along the way, because this is an example that I lived through as a patient, as opposed to being on either side of the divide. But when I was in hospital having my youngest, John, my consultant had just received a new software package. And it was very funny, because he didn't know that I had any understanding or involvement, or knew anything about what was going on. But he just said to me, oh, this piece of software, it makes no sense. It's changing how I've practiced for the last 30 years. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, just a simple flow of how they're recording more details. I don't do it like that. I do it a certain way. And he said, maybe other people do it a different way. But then simple things like having to, go into different tabs, just the layout of it, the feel of it, it actually was changing the way he was interacting with patients. And what he said to me is like, I wish someone had just sat down with me for 5 minutes so I could have shown them what I did. And then they would have been able to learn from me. So I think exactly what you're saying, you need to have that partnership at the very beginning. Have people, really, when you get your set of requirements, go and actually talk to the people as well. And as you're building, make sure that they are on board as you're going along the way. And if they are inputting and saying, actually, hang on, this doesn't look right, or I don't think we should do it this way, listen to that. And yes, absolutely, you might want to develop it in a certain way and have those end goals and share them, but then also be willing to take the feedback of, hang on, that's actually not going to work in a clinical setting. And there may be a very practical reason for it. There may be, a very simple clinical, well, we can't actually do it in that way. So I think that's why you need to have those people in at the very, very beginning.
It's really interesting you share that experience. Last year, while I was working at Boots, me and my team had the opportunity to go into one of our Boots pharmacies and to look at how a pharmacy operates. So the Boots pharmacy system that operates all of the pharmaceutical drugs and all of the prescriptions is called Columbus. And we were talking to one of the pharmacists there, and he was demonstrating how he used it. And he said, there's this button here that's on this screen because it's not on this screen over here. Every time I maybe click this button 60, 70 times a day, but it adds an extra 4 or 5 clicks to my life in order to do that. So if there's one thing you could do which really helped me, just move this button from this screen to this screen, and it would save me hours over the course of a year. And we did it. We made that simple change. But that all came about because we went into a pharmacy and had a direct conversation with somebody who was actually using the system. Whereas actually an engineer who's sitting behind a screen, who's never worked in the pharmacy before, simply wouldn't understand that. So I think that there's direct parallels there from what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's all about learning what the other person is doing, learning about their environment and what they have to deal with. Because, as you said, sitting in front of a computer screen is very different than when you have a patient in front of you. And what you want to do, and I think that's, again, it comes back to what we were talking about earlier on, is it's the fundamentals of getting things right. I think it's listening to that feedback. And what we have at the moment in healthcare is we have a lot of different systems that don't integrate with each other. You have clinicians logging in and out of different systems. You have, they need to go one system for one piece of information, another system for another bit of information, your laboratory systems, you have your x-ray systems. And what you want to do is you want to try and bring them together. And I think that's probably where we have in the past and continue to seem to fail. And there are some places who have got it right and have that connectivity and interconnectivity, and they have that integrated approach to things. But then I think what we've done in healthcare sometimes is you run with a new idea and go, right, let's all do this, and then forget that there's so many other elements and components to it. And unless it's a conversation we've had many times before, APIs, where are we getting the information from? What information do we actually need? What information do we have to share? How do we do it safely? How do we do it securely? How do we make sure that the right care at the right time, the right piece of information is with the right person at the right time? So if you are a clinician, what information do you actually need at that point in time? If you're down in a lab looking at a sample, what information do you need at that right point in time? I think it's trying to bring all those systems together is where we've traditionally just gone and procured different systems for everything, and then afterwards gone, this is a brilliant system, it does this amount of it. That's fine and all, and it does it, and it might do it really, really well. But it just means that you have to log in as a doctor, you have to log into 6 different systems to get all the bits of information that you need. So we haven't actually cracked that cohesive piece together.
Yeah. There is definitely something about the interoperability of systems, isn't there? I mean, you mentioned open API ecosystems and those things, which can definitely help with that. But I still think that the challenge is how you solve the big picture, while solving incremental kind of your problems. So you want to make sure you're delivering value fast to a customer. You want to make sure that patients and clinicians are getting value early. But you want to do that in a way that is contributing towards the bigger picture, so that actually you aren't trying to solve a siloed problem. And
Absolutely.
That's time and time again where somebody will have a point problem they're trying to solve, and we'll have a system that will do that. But in doing that, we only look at the point problem, and we don't consider the holistic picture of where we're trying to kind of fit into and how that's going to work for the wider ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. And ecosystem, there we go. That's what we're trying to build. That's what we're trying to achieve. And some people have done that incredibly well in certain areas in healthcare, and then some not so good. But I do think that unless as engineers, if you're not going out and listening to the people and engaging and really seeing the problem that you're trying to solve, you're going to solve a different problem. Unless you're experiencing exactly what you need to solve, you will solve what seems sensible on paper. But as you know, what's sensible on paper is not necessarily the reality of of a very complex case. Or humans are all complex and crazy and bizarre. And code, when written well, is simple and neat and nice and tidy and looks well.
Absolutely. And I mean, thinking about your role within Boots, you've been working in Boots for almost a year now.
Yeah.
How are Boots approaching some of those challenges and making sure that they really connect to the patients and to the end users when they're implementing systems across their estate?
Well, I think the one thing that Boots has done incredibly well is that they have pharmacists at the heart of all of the projects that they're delivering, and you will get the pharmacist input. And I think there are nice relationships between people. So far that I've discovered that you can always ask questions, and there's always people there to help you out. And as you said, I mean, you gave the perfect example. You went out, you spoke to the pharmacist, you moved a button for them. That's what you need to do, and that's what I think is key to do. With COVID, and when you saw what happened in a very short space of time, we had to solve a need quite quickly, and that was going out, talking to the pharmacist. What do you actually need? What is going to get you through this? And how do we do this as quick as possible to get you to the next endpoint? And then how do we iterate on that and make it better and improve it as we go along? And I think those are the conversations that you need to be having, and those are the conversations that you need to keep going. And because we have such a focus on healthcare now within Boots, I think that can only get better, because the more people we talk to and the more clinicians we engage, and the work that we've done with the NHS, the work that we do with the HSE, one thing that they always do, and I think that we've done quite well in Boots, is we talk to the people that we need to speak to. I suppose the danger is that we don't listen. And if we don't listen, you're not going to get the right product and you're going to get it wrong. But I think we have to be not afraid to be brave and go, okay, I disagree with this or agree with this. And there are lots of strong personalities within Boots. And I think that's the one thing I've actually experienced, that if people do disagree with each other, they do quite well. and they have actually, they'll take the time to listen to each other. And I think that's really, really important.
I think you're right. There is definitely something about healthy disagreement, right? It's a good thing to actually stand up for a point and make sure you've been heard and listened to, and collectively kind of discussing across the group and coming to the best collective solution. That whole thing about your two heads is better than one definitely feels like it's applicable in that space.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So thinking about, you mentioned COVID there, some of the things which Boots did in response to the pandemic, and some of the things you saw that really had a direct impact on patients in Ireland. Maybe pick on 2 or 3 examples and talk us through some of your favourite innovative approaches that were taken.
I think what COVID did, it was really, because at the beginning of COVID, I was in a different organisation. I was working with CareDoc. And we were a healthcare organisation delivering out of hours GP care and hospital in the home care. And it was quite interesting because with our organisation, all the other organisations, pharmacies, everybody wanted to work together. Everybody wanted to achieve something. So everybody pulled out all the stops. And when I moved over to Boots, we were working on trying to deliver software to support the COVID vaccination journey within Boots, or the PCR journey within Boots, and the COVID vaccination journey as well. But what we did is we worked with the HSE, we worked with other organisations to figure out how could we do it the best. And I think that's one thing that traditionally, I think people can be quite reticent to just make decisions and get on with things. But we didn't have a choice. We just had to get on and do it, and we had to deliver something good, and we had to make sure that it worked for everyone. I think what I really, really found fascinating was just how willing people were to change all of the time, and how for different cohorts, different age groups, from a software engineering perspective, you were changing small little things like, you're eligible now because you're over 60. Oh, now you're eligible because you're over 50. But that's still deploying new code every time, because you're changing the decision engine in the background. You're changing what applies, what doesn't apply. Who's eligible for a vaccine now, who's eligible for one later. How are you going to try and keep that information? And what we found is the teams that we were working with, they helped us and they supported us to get that to where it needed to be. But that required, again, our pharmacists who knew the legislation inside out, being able to translate that into the engineering teams and the software teams to say, this is what we're trying to achieve, this is what we're trying to develop, these are the flows, this is the information that we need now, this is what we need about this vaccination. These are all of it. And I suppose that's the thing with healthcare. You then all have to take in all this legislative piece of to say, we have to show a patient this, we have to make sure they understand this. How do you capture that? How are you capturing all the information? And with patient records, you can't change a patient record. You have to have the correct audit trail. You have to make sure that you have everything date stamped, time stamped, who's, interacting with the record, who has the ability to change it. If a patient answers, I'm not allergic to something, and then you give them the vaccine and it turns out they are, you have to go back. They can't go back and go, oh, I checked the wrong button or the right button. You have to make sure you have all those small little things correct. And that can only be done by working with people and changing your process as you go along and listening to people. I think that's what Boots did incredibly well. And when I joined, they were rolling out the software for PCR testing. And that was something that, again, we had to be very, cognizant of. How are we going to interact with the labs in the back end? Who do we need support from? Could we do it all ourselves? Did we need third parties? And that's the other thing. It's that piece of not being afraid to kind of, some people want all of the code for all of themselves. But, what can you share? What can you do better? How do you actually make that difference? And I suppose it wasn't unique to just Boots. There was so many organizations who just got together and worked together to see what did they need to do and what did they need to deliver.
Yeah, I think that there was definitely a sense as we kind of approached the pandemic of organisations wanting to come together and to help each other. Yeah, there was much less of a focus on making sure we had the right IP arrangements or making sure that the right agreements were in place within the organisations, and much more a focus on what do we need to achieve. And I guess not all of that is good, right? I mean, obviously we need to come back away from some of those things in order to protect what organisations want to achieve. But I think one thing that I did observe during COVID that was definitely a different way of operating was how we approach financing things, not just in Boots but in many organisations across the globe. Traditionally, things are always tied to an investment case, which might be tied to a 3-year plan or to a budget cycle. And when COVID hit, suddenly money was available. Organizations recognized we just needed to operate quickly, and we didn't have time to deal with some of the bureaucracy that we potentially would have ordinarily had to deal with. I just wonder what your experience is of that, and do you think that that's something that we can learn from and we might be able to keep in a post-COVID world?
I hope it's something that we can definitely keep, because I think sometimes we can be too restrictive in what we're trying to do. And it was funny, I moved from a not-for-profit organization to a global Boots organization with Walgreen Boots Alliance, and to see the complexities and the structures and everything that was in place there, it was mind-blowing for me, because I had come from a much smaller organization where it was a lot easier to just get in and get things done. It's something, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing or a code to live by, but it's better to seek forgiveness than ask for permission. Sometimes that is the best and fastest way to get things done. It's not necessarily, as you said, it's not necessarily the right way, but sometimes some programs just need that. And I think because of the way a lot of the financing works, and it is very, very complex, you have to make sure that you do have the right governance arrangements in place, that you are doing the right things. But also, I would hate to lose the ability to make those decisions quicker, which definitely happened throughout the pandemic. People saw a need, they addressed that need, they implemented it, and that was that. I would hate to think of going back to a time where you have to go through way more lengthy processes. And as you said, yes, you need processes, you need them. But we've proven that they can be done quite quickly. We've proven that they can be done quickly and safely. So don't lose all of that. I think definitely you have to keep that momentum going.
Definitely. And I mean, I guess linked to that and that quick iteration, maybe to play devil's advocate a little bit. I know you're really passionate about change management and that being really key to successful implementation of any new technology. And I guess that's both IT change and business change, right? So just because I can do something quickly within IT doesn't mean the business is necessarily ready for it and able to adapt to it. So what do you really think is needed to drive connected and integrated healthcare delivery?
Oh, wow. I think an openness and a trust and a lot of transparency. I think when you want to change, you need to bring your stakeholders in early and keep it. I suppose it's back to that same vein that we've been talking about. It's making sure the right people are involved at the right time, but it's also having champions. It's having people within the organization that agree with your idea, that can champion your idea. It's peers talking to peers. And I think it's not being afraid to be in an open forum. And if someone challenges you, rather than just shutting them down, actually listening to them and saying, okay, I understand why you're nervous about this, or I understand. But also then reading a room when you're in a room full of people, because there's always going to be people who speak up. But there are also people who may be too nervous to speak up or who don't feel like they can just, put their hand up and ask a question. So I think it's creating that kind of really that open door policy where you've created something that people don't feel like they can't speak to you, but also to be aware, because if you're a leader in an organization, you want to know the people around you are comfortable and trust in you and trust in what you're doing. But you'll also be able to see if someone's kind of uncomfortable or nervous. And rather than shutting people down if they disagree with you, or if you can tell that, maybe they want to ask a question, even being available to go to them afterwards and say, here, drop me a line anytime, just email me, ask the questions. And it's always creating that channel of communication, really. It is communication, that old cliche. It's making sure what your idea or what you're trying to achieve, that you have communicated what you want to with everyone, but also giving them the opportunity to come back and saying, well, maybe I don't agree with this, or maybe I do agree with this, but trying to work through it with them, as opposed to just saying, oh, never mind, we're doing it my way and that's that. It's just working with people and kind of communicating the message out to people. But also it is persevering through it, because you will have people who disagree with you and you will have people who are not going to like the idea. And you also have to, deal with, that kind of instant reaction where you're like, oh, they're not listening to me, or, they don't like my idea, so I don't care. They might not like your idea, but they might have a reason that they don't like your idea. So it's listening to them and communicating with them as well. And just, I think if you have that champion, or if you know that idea is going to work and you have someone to be able to, be on your side basically and say, right, let's try and do this. Let's get through it. It's so important, and not to try and exclude anyone. And it's very hard to be inclusive of everybody, but do try that, and do ask the question, do you think we have everybody that we need in this room? Have we asked the people the right question? And it's back to, who's involved at a certain length of time, because obviously you don't want to involve absolutely everybody and make it super complicated. But you do want to make sure that the right people know about it and the right people are inputting at the right time, and always give people a chance to come back and say, oh, can I bring a question to you now, or what do you think about this now?
And I guess some of that is tied with the work that you did with the World Health Organization. I know you previously led the Global Forum on Change Management, which was all about encouraging members to exchange learnings and promote continuous improvement. Just wonder if you can maybe reflect on some of the learnings you took from that experience.
It's really difficult to get people to share. People will always tell you the good stories. They will always gloss over the kind of what was hard. So one of the key things we did there was try to encourage people to share what didn't work well, what didn't go right for them. And I think you can't improve, or you can't, you can't have continuous improvement if you're not going to accept or not willing to accept that occasionally things will go wrong and you will fail. So if you share those with others, how do you learn from that? How do you, what would I have done differently? What would I have done better? Like, people want to go out and sell the good story. They want to sell the successful story. And I think it's creating that environment where people are comfortable to share. And what we did first is kind of we shared the stories of the good and the bad. Why didn't this work? It didn't work because we didn't talk to the right people at the right time, or we went in with our idea and thought it was the best thing ever and didn't actually, ask the other people what they wanted. So I think if you're going to continuously improve, you have to share your failings as well as your successes, but try learn from them. I mean, don't just say, oh, we failed, let's brush it under the carpet. Try and talk through, why did it fail? Why did we think we could have done differently? But also invite feedback from people to say, how do you think we could have done it differently? Or did you do it differently? And what did you do differently? Because I think that's the only way we can learn from each other. Because at the end of the day, when you look at healthcare across the world, we're all trying to make people better. We're all trying to do, fundamental things just to improve people's quality of life, to look after people, to empower them, to educate them. And a lot of the time, we might think we know best, but if you include the patient, if you include someone who has had a long-term illness, you have a very specialized knowledge on a short space of time on something. This person has been living with this illness all their lives. So engage them, talk to them, share them, and don't be. I think sometimes forums and people can be quite exclusive with things, and we know best. Try not be exclusive. Try include everyone in the conversation. A lot of the time, though, you're going to be pushing open doors, because people who are going to jump on forums or contribute are the people who already want to do this. So it's how do you try and engage other people, or how do you try and engage those who are a bit skeptical about what you're trying to do?
Definitely. And I guess you're talking about successes and failures. One of your big successes is definitely that you established One Health Ireland. And the vision within that organisation is to build a more inclusive and innovative future health system. So why is diversity and inclusion so important to you in that space?
Yeah, One Health Tech Ireland is part of a global network that was started in the UK, and we now have chapters all over the world. And it grew out of I suppose that need for, if you're just solving, if just one person is solving a problem, or if one person is just writing code with their unconscious bias, with their thoughts, if they're designing technology for just themselves or the people they know, you're going to get a very, I suppose, narrow view of the world and narrow view of everything. So what you need is people from different backgrounds to come in with their ideas. And that's why in One Health Tech, it's not only about diversity of background or gender or sexual identity or anything like that at all. What we actually want to bring is even people from different backgrounds, not in healthcare, so aeronautical engineering, or something else that someone has done, because everybody has a different way of looking at things. And I think it's that bias that you will create if you do not try and include people, and if you don't try to be inclusive. It's something that I suppose in one way seems kind of obvious, yet when you look at the people who are writing software, or who are like you and I, in a privileged position where we have a lot of education, we have really good jobs, we have houses, we don't have to worry about where our next meal is going to come from. If you kind of step back a bit and go, right, are we actually designing software and tech for everybody? Because we've talked a lot about what can we do with technology, what can we do about that. When we haven't addressed is, well, what if I don't have a smartphone? What if I don't have an internet connection? What if I can't afford data for my phone? What if I can't afford any sort of, what if I can't afford electricity? So there's this whole area of digital poverty that exists as well. And unless you're thinking about that, or unless you're bringing people on board who are going to think about that, you're always going to solve a problem for just one cohort of people. Whereas really, you need to be thinking wider. You need to be thinking, how can you solve for a much bigger problem? And I think that's actually one thing from a Boots perspective that I think they're trying to achieve with their technology in stores. That if people don't have a phone, if people don't have a laptop, if they don't have those things, they can use the technology within store. You can phone, or you can have a video consultation with a GP. You can go in, you can speak to your pharmacist, you can get advice that way. But I think we always have to, I suppose, be cognizant of that, but then also digital literacy as well. How many people are going to know, oh, I'm going to download this app and I'm going to look after my health and everything's going to be cool. There's that whole cohort of people that are not going to be able to do that. So how do we keep them involved? How do we make sure that we're thinking about them?
There is definitely something about groupthink, and if you get a bunch of people into a room with the same backgrounds or the same experience, they will all tend to think the same sort of things. And actually, by bringing that diversity of experience alive, it really does make a huge difference to the products you're developing and how that needs to work. I think. In a related vein, one of the things I was most proud of that Boots did during the pandemic was opening up its stores so that if you were a victim of domestic violence or needed to access somebody who could help in that space, you go into a Boots pharmacy and use the consultation room, and they made telephones and iPads and things available for you to access that support that you need. And when you start thinking in that world and think, well, actually, some people haven't got access to that technology, and there was hundreds of people used that service across the Boots landscape, both in the UK and Ireland. And I mean, the very fact that people did decide to use that, is fantastic. What a success in terms of what was created, but also really heart-wrenching to think that such a service is actually needed in 21st century Britain.
Well, that is the problem, I suppose. And again, that comes back to when you're coming from a more privileged position, or you don't have to worry about those things. Are you necessarily thinking about them when you're designing an app or a piece of software? No, you're not. So it's how do you make sure that you are thinking of these things and that you are thinking about the population that, are at risk, are in danger, and how can you support them?
Definitely. I mean, that really brings us back to software engineering. So, as an engineering leader, I'm really passionate about enabling your people through the use of technology. And all of the things we've been talking about there is all about enabling people, enabling patients, enabling consumers to access technology and do some really cool things they wouldn't be able to do if we weren't able to execute in the digital space that we do. But that really does need a really clear alignment between the product vision and engineering execution. From your perspective, how do we better align those two areas?
It comes back to that understanding and engagement piece. What problem are you actually trying to solve? What are you trying to achieve? And it will always be different for different questions. But it is about people, and it is about working together, and it is about understanding the landscape that you're in and understanding the problem that has been asked of you. Can you solve this problem? Okay, what are we actually trying to solve here? How are we going to do it? And it is that talking together. And it's not being, I think what we have done quite well is getting the right people talking to each other. And I think the more you do that, the better your product's going to be at the end of the day, because you're actually going to be solving that, the problem that the person actually has, as opposed to what you think that they have. And it's being not afraid to kind of go or take a step back and go, right, okay, we didn't get this right. Let's go back and see what we actually need to do. Don't be afraid to change. And, the world is always changing. The landscape is always changing. And we just have to always change with it. Because I think if we get into this, and it is that danger, isn't it? That whole waterfall model of, okay, here's a set of requirements, come back in 4 years and deliver it. And, everything has changed. So there is that need to just constantly be listening and going back and being agile and talking to people and including people as you go along the way. I think from an engineering perspective, it's that getting people, as you said in Boots, getting people out into stores. From a healthcare perspective, it's making sure people are understanding the patient journey, the clinician's journey. What are they actually trying to solve? And from, I suppose, when you look at it from the CIO, CCIO perspective, it's making sure that you have the right people around the table, and that from if you're designing a piece of software for a hospital, you need the admin side of things, you need the nursing side. They'll need something different than the doctor needs. They'll need something different than the physiotherapist needs. They'll need something different than the radiographer needs. So it's just always making sure that you're thinking about what everybody is doing and what everyone actually needs. But again, it's just about getting people together and talking.
So I guess you've been at the heart of all sorts of deliveries across your career, right? That's delivered value to patients in no end of ways. You're looking back over your career. What is the proudest delivery you've been a part of?
One of the really cool things in Boots is our dispensing robot in Liffey Valley. Like, that is pretty cool tech. And what it's done is that I think a lot of people are kind of like, oh, the robots are taking over. They're taking all our jobs. But that's not the case. What the robot has done in Liffey Valley, it means that the pharmacist now has more time to spend with patients, to engage with the person, rather than spending their time just stocking shelves, which can be done by a robot. So the robot can stock the shelves, it'll sort out the medication, and then it also learns as it goes along. So if you dispense some more amoxicillin than you do anything else, it will move the amoxicillin closer to the dispensing chute so that it's easier and faster for it. So it's actually learning all the time, and it's always reclassifying where everything is. And then, cool thing, cleans the shelves at the end of the night. So I do one of those at home. A robot going around cleaning.
That sounds really important. And I mean, I guess all of the innovations you're coming about in the healthcare space over the last few years, really is phenomenal at the pace of change that we're seeing, and we've talked about some of that over the course of the last hour or so. But I mean, crystal ball time. What is next in the healthcare space, and what do we as an industry need to enable in order for healthcare to be successful?
It's going to be the most boring answer ever. We need to get basic technology right. I mean, you have the world and its mother talking about AI, machine learning, algorithms, all the rest of it. What are they going to do that? Like, I mean, the hospital records are down on, sheets of paper and folders miles wide. We have to get the basic things right. We have to get, when you have a patient record and you have a little yellow sticky note stuck onto it with some important piece of information, how are you going to do AI and machine learning on that? You're not. We have to get the basic things right before we can do the really cool future things. And that's the thing. There's so many amazing technologies out there. There are so many great ways to help patients and support patients. But it comes back to the fundamentals of, you have to get the basics of what you're doing right. And I know I harp on about this the whole time. I'm really boring. Like, I really genuinely am just so boring, because I'm like, you got to get the basics right. You got to build the trust. But again, if a clinician is trying to open a record and it takes them 10 minutes to open a record, that's 10 minutes they could have been spending with a patient. So you've got to get those bits and pieces right, and then look into, crystal ball and crystal gazing, into like 10 years' time. What I'd love to see from an Irish perspective, I'd love to see an integrated healthcare record where you had a summary of the important points that a patient actually needs when they go into a hospital, and to have that movement of information from one hospital to the next, to have that seamless transfer of information that is required for the clinician to treat a patient. Because at the moment, if you go from one hospital to the next hospital, you're going to get the same tests all over again, because it's just easier than trying to transfer information from one place to another. So I'd love to see that happening. To enable that, you need, again, in Ireland, we need our individual health identifier. You have your NHS number. That does exist within Ireland, but we need to start rolling it out into our systems and creating that interoperability that doesn't necessarily exist at the moment.
Michelle, the insights you shared over the last hour have been absolutely fantastic. It's been an absolute pleasure to talking to you today. Thank you so much for agreeing to come and join the engineering leader. And I'm sure in the future I would love to get you to come back and maybe talk more about some of the innovations you've been working on within the healthcare space. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Talking to Michelle, it really hit home to me the opportunities that we have within the engineering community to directly impact the lives of people, particularly for those of us who are privileged to work within the healthcare space. Listening to Michelle talk about the opportunity we have to use technology for good is incredibly inspirational and something I know I'm going to encourage the engineering teams that I work with to focus on. You've been listening to The Engineering Leader, a weekly podcast where I talk to people working within engineering and tech. I really hope you find the podcast useful. If you do, please reach out to me on Twitter @SteveWestgarth or search Steve Westgarth on LinkedIn. I'm also actively looking for people who would like to contribute to the podcast. If you have something interesting to say, please don't hesitate to reach out. My name is Steve Westgarth, and this is The Engineering Leader. Let me tell you a secret. You also write bad code. If you disagree, you may as well switch off.